So this is what I got when I plugged the word apocalypse into an AI movie generator. Now, the way these generators work is they usually search the internet for things related to the word that you put in there, and they sort of make an average of all those videos. So it's safe to say that this is what the internet thinks Armageddon would look like. I think it's safe to say that humans have probably been speculating on the end of society ever since society existed to begin with. Books and movies often portray the end of society as being caused by things like a nuclear war or a catastrophic climate change or pandemics or ecological collapse. And this last one, ecological collapse, is what I want to talk about today. So before I talk about the end of the world, I want to backtrack and look a little bit at some high school ecology here. So every ecosystem has finite resources and can only support a certain number of individuals per species. So I'm going to start out by demonstrating a basic population growth curve. This is something we do in ecology all the time. And we have an x-axis and a y-axis. And I'm going to use, for example, the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone Park. So I'm going to measure the wolf population, and then I'm going to measure it again and again and again. So it's over time, I will have the population. So initially what you're going to see here is the population is an exponential growth curve. So you're first going to introduce, there's no wolves, you introduce them, they start to grow, but then ultimately the growth tapers off and it becomes steady. The population becomes steady at that line. And that line is what we call the carrying capacity of that ecosystem for that species. Nature loves a balance, and the carrying capacity of an ecosystem represents the highest population of a plant or animal that a single ecosystem can support. So if your population is above the carrying capacity, then the overpopulated wolves will overhunt and eventually kill all the elk in an area. And the result will be starvation on the part of the wolves because they overpopulated. And on the other hand, if the wolf population is below the carrying capacity, then that represents that the population has room to grow. 10,000 years ago, human beings existed as mostly hunter-gatherer societies. However, about 10,000 years ago, the agricultural revolution began, and this marked the first time that any animal had ever surpassed its carrying capacity on the planet. So 200 years ago, when the science of ecology was in its infancy, we were really starting to understand these numbers. And then lived an economist named Thomas Robert Malthus. And Malthus became famous for predicting the apocalypse. So Malthus sat down here and he decided to do a population growth curve of humans on the Earth, using Earth as an ecosystem. So he started out with the population, the number of humans, and he did it over time. And you see this exponential growth. That's normal. That's what you would initially see. Now, he also, on that same chart, plotted agricultural development. And you'll notice that's a straight line. And ultimately, those two lines are going to merge, or they're going to cross over. And that's what we call, a Malthusian collapse. It's predicted that here is where there will be a breakdown of the fabric of society. So this ultimately will result in global famine, mass starvation, and of course, marauding feudal factions depending on gasoline as their only currency. And eventually, of course, the rise of the zombies. Now keep in mind that humans exceeded their carrying capacity on the Earth about 10,000 years ago. So every single prediction that's been made in the last 200 years ultimately have been completely wrong. The time will come and the time will go and there will be no Malthusian collapse. So why is this? Well, it's because Malthus had one thing completely wrong. He failed to factor in human ingenuity. Humans are industrious, and have thus far inadvertently engineered their way out of a complete Malthusian collapse. Let me explain. So let's go back to Malthus's graph here. He had the exponential curve of growing human population, but it turns out through human ingenuity, that agricultural production line is not straight. It is curved, and it curves right along up with the population growth curve. So technologies that have enabled us to grow our population include cropping systems, irrigation, plant breeding. Mechanization came a little later on, mechanization of farms, and then in the early 20th century we have chemical fertilizers, which was huge. And then today, of course, we have genetically modified crops that are increasing crop yield. What we don't know. So while thus far we've engineered our way out of a Malthusian collapse, we don't know what the future holds. Looking at exponential growth of the human population on the Earth, I think it's safe to say that it's not going to end very well. And eventually we will have a Malthusian collapse further down the road. There, now, I made a whole video without mentioning termites.